So now that we've got our Small Business Server 2008 machine ready to go, what we're going to do is we're going to now go and create duplicates of our baseline Windows 2008 R2 server machine. And we're going to create two duplicates. One of them is going to become our SQL Server machine, and one of them is going to become our Terminal Services machine. So what do I need to do? Well, first thing I've got to do is go into our baseline machine, and I need to export that out. Now once I've exported it out once, I then keep that exported machine, and I can import that back in as many times as I want into as many different machines as I want, and then go ahead and configure those. So let's do this first step first, and I'll go and I'll choose export. Now what it's going to do, it's going to ask me specifically where do I want to export my virtual machine. So I'll choose browse. I'm going to go to my D drive on my Hyper-V machine, and this one's called, I've created a folder called VM export, so I'm going to use that, and then I choose, I say select folder, and I say export. So now you can't actually see anything happening here, but what's going on in the background on the Hyper-V server, it is creating the duplicate of that virtual machine that you've chosen to export. So we're going to give that a couple of minutes. It should usually, depending on the size of the virtual machine, can take quite a while, mainly because of the size of the virtual hard drive, but because we haven't put a lot of work into this baseline image, or this baseline virtual machine, shouldn't take us too long. So what we're going to then do is, once we've got that exported out, we're going to come in and we're going to import that into two new machines. So I'm just going to pause for a little while and let that go through. So it's been a couple of minutes now, and our baseline virtual machine should now have been exported. So here's the trick. Before we import that virtual machine back in, we're going to need to go and make a duplicate of the exported files, because when we run the import, if we haven't made a duplicate, it's going to just pull those duplicated files, and we're not going to be able to re-import them again. So let's go and take a look at that. What I'm going to do is just open up a browser, a file browser, a file explorer. Okay, so I've got my Explorer open. I'm going to drop down here, and I'm going to take a look at all of my machines, and there it is. There's my Hyper-V Server 2. Now in order to access the D drive, I'm just going to use the $, and you can see if I go in here into my VM exports, I've now got my folder which contains the files that were exported. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that, I'm going to choose copy, and then I'm going to go in here and I'm going to say paste, and it's automatically creating a copy of that with the word copy on it. Now I can then go and rename that later if I want to, but this is critical. If you don't do that, when we go in and we import this baseline server, it will disappear, and then if you haven't made the copy, you can't import it again. So hopefully that makes sense. So I'm just going to let that run through and let that copy go through, and then when that's finished, we'll come back again. As a matter of fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here, and I am going to copy that again, and I'm going to paste that again, so we'll end up with two copies. So we'll have a copy and a copy 2. So these will be what I will use to create my two new virtual servers, leaving this one, my baseline export, untouched. So now I've got my copies. I'm going to take both of those, and I'm going to cut, and then we'll go here into our production VMs, and I'm going to paste them in here. So now they're pasted, and then I'm going to rename the folders, and I'm going to call this one SQL Server, and then I'm going to call this one Terminal Server, and they're now ready. And now that I've done that, I'm going to go back and I'm now going to choose to import virtual machine. I'm going to browse out to where those machines are now located in my production VMs. I'll choose my SQL server and I'll select the folder. And I'm saying I'm copying the virtual machine because I want to create a new unique ID, and I'll say import, and we'll let that run while that virtual machine gets imported. Okay, so that's got our SQL Server machine configured. Let's go and duplicate the same process, because obviously I didn't drag the dialog boxes across into the recording area, so it was a little bit hard to see. So we'll go and we'll do that again. So we'll say import virtual machine. This time I'll drag it across. I am copying the virtual machine. That's going to create a new unique ID. I'm going to browse out to where that file is, and remember I created those files over here in my production VMs. I'm now going to do my terminal server, so I select that folder and I say import, and again we'll let that import process run and it will create that virtual machine. So you can see that once that import has finished, I now actually have two machines here called Baseline Windows 2008 R2 Server, because of course that was the name of the virtual machine that I exported, so it's going to import back in with that name. So to make sure I'm changing the name of the right one, all I need to do is go here, look at the machine, go and have a quick look at the settings, look at the location of the hard drive. That's the D baseline VM, so that's not the right one. If I look at this one and I look at the settings, the location of the hard drive, okay, that's in my production VM's terminal server. So that's actually the right one that I'm looking for. So all I need to do is go down here to the name, and I'll now rename this and I'll call it my terminal server. So I'll say OK. And that now makes it a lot easier to identify. I'll just choose refresh, and so now you can see there I have the SQL server that I imported and the terminal server that I've imported. So the next step is to go and continue the configuration of each one of these virtual machines now, and I now want to join them to the domain that has been created with my Small Business Server 2008. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect to the terminal server, and I'll choose Start, and that'll let that virtual machine start up. And then if I come here to my SQL server and I connect to that, now I don't actually need to connect. Matter of fact, I'll just show you one connected and one not. All I need to do is go here and click on Start, and that will start up as well. And then if I connect here, now the very first time I start these virtual machines up after I've gone through the import-export process, it can take a little while for the machines to start up. So don't be alarmed if it does take a little bit of time. I'm just going to pause the recording and just give those virtual machines time to start. So you can see our SQL Server machine is now started, so I can go into Action, I can choose Control-Alt-Delete, login as administrator with the password that I set up. And then what I want to do in order to make sure that my virtual machine environment works as effectively as possible, I'm going to go and set static IP addresses on all of my virtual servers. Alright, so I'm also going to go and I'm going to change the computer name and join these to the domain. So let's change the IP address first. So here's my network. I'll open my network and sharing center. Now my domain controller is IP address 10.0.0.3, so I'm going to go into my adapter settings here. I'm going to go to my properties, and you can pick any IP address that you want as long as it's on the same subnet. I know the IP addresses of all the different machines I've got on mine, so I'm going to make this 10.0.0.210. So 10.0.0.210, and it's subnet 255.255.255, and the default gateway will be 10.0.0.137, and my DNS will be 10.0.0.3, which is the DNS server that's running on the small business server. So I'll say OK to that and close, and that all looks OK. And just to make sure, I'm just going to open up a command prompt, and I'm going to ping 10.0.0.2, make sure I can ping that, so I've got network connectivity, so that's all good. Alright, so my next step that I'm going to go through here is I'm going to change my system properties. So I'll click here on change, and I'm going to change my computer name, and I'm going to make this OEC SQL server. Makes it easy to identify when I'm looking at it in the browser list. And I'll say OK to that. Now I have to do this in two steps. I have to change the computer name first, restart it, and then join it to the domain. So I'll say OK to that, close, and restart that machine. And you see that was nice and quick when it did the shutdown. And this time when I restart, you'll actually see that the startup of the virtual machine is a lot faster. I'll give that a couple more seconds, and there we go. I go back in, action, Control Alt Delete, log back in. Now each time I start up these virtual servers, they are going to come up with the server manager, which is okay. When I've finished configuring it, I can then deactivate that by clicking on Do Not Show this window at logon. So you can see this is now called OEC SQL Server. It's a member of the workgroup called Workgroup. I'm going to go in here, I'm going to change that now. I'm going to make this a member of the domain. So the domain is OEC Computers, and I'll say OK to that. Now going to ask me for the an account of an administrator on the domain, which is the account that I've set up for myself during the small business server installation. And we'll say OK to that. In a couple of seconds we'll get a message saying that this this machine has joined that domain. And we're also just getting a little pop-up there from Windows Update, so I'll just get rid of that. And you can see there we go, welcome to the OEC Computers domain, and again we now need to restart. So we'll restart that. So that's done, and I'm going to let that restart in the background, so I'll close that, and let's now actually look at our terminal server, and we'll connect here. So here's our terminal server, and I'll just do Control Alt Delete. And we'll go through the same process here with this machine. What do I need to do? I need to set a static IP address, then I need to change the machine name and join it to the domain.